Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris, and appreciate the intro, and good morning, everybody. Again, this is Carter Yepsen with Aspire Technology Partners. This is the second in a series of webinars focusing on the industrial network and specifically on securing the industrial network. So whether that's a SCADA network or an industrial control system, that's the part of the business that we are focused on. Today's webinar is specifically on security and the cybersecurity of the industrial network. Lots of incidents in the news lately that certainly bring to the fore the topic of cybersecurity and all that it impacts the business. So, whether that's on shareholder value or company reputation or just continuing operations, it's obviously in the forefront of people's minds, and not just those that run and control the networks in the control room, but in the boardroom. We're seeing the level of these impacts, and the attention is really at the executive level. So we'll go back and forth between talking about technology and talking about the impact on the business. From a variety of perspectives. I am joined by a panel of industry experts today that we'll introduce in a minute, but you can see on the slide in front of you what our agenda is for the morning. So we'll start at a kind of high level, talking about industry trends, and then we'll drop down a level and talk a little bit more specifically about what some of the vulnerabilities are and how those impact the business. And then we'll talk about data, and some insights that we might derive from that. And then finally, we'll talk about some solutions and how you might implement those solutions to address these particular problems. So again, thanks very much for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Brandon Oppedisano.
Well, welcome. This is great. We're talking seatbelts and hard hats. That's my analogy. You always put a seatbelt on when you're in a car, so cybersecurity is really the seatbelt for the industrial community. I'm Paul Gasparro. I'm with Cisco. It's great to be here. It's great to be hosted by these folks. And before we start with the panel introductions, we are going to have 2 quiz questions at the end of the session, and Chris is going to monitor the answers for some really cool brand new Cisco IoT giveaways, including a hat. You won't get this one. I'll make sure you get a brand new one. So without further ado, let's go through and introduce the panel. I feel like I'm on a game show. So from left to right, Pascal, if you could introduce yourself.
My pleasure, Paul, and nice to meet all of you. First of all, I just saw that it was a pre-COVID photo, so I need to go to the hairdresser to do this type of presentation. So my name is Pascal Lemain, as I said, and I was in charge of go-to-market for Centrio, company that has been acquired 2 years ago by Cisco. And I'm now in charge of the global basis of partner enablement in order to promote OT cybersecurity for all of our partners and addressing the vast majority of our customers. And one more time, many thanks for being with you today.
Awesome. And by the way, Pascal is with Cisco now. That's an older picture there. So Centrio was acquired by Cisco and is now our Cybervision product. So Dan, you're next on the panel. Welcome.
Hello. Yep. So Dan Malyszko of Malisko Engineering. So we are a Cisco digital solution integrator partner. We're a little bit non-traditional in the sense that we cover the plant floor. So we're pure OT. And hopefully what we can do today is bring the control system OT perspective.
Awesome. And Rick.
Hey everybody, my name is Rick Oppedisano. I'm the CEO of Delta Bravo. Like Dan and the team at Malyszko, we are a Cisco DSI partner. But what we do is we focus on taking the data that is collected on the factory floor and turning that into predictive models that reduce risk, reduce waste, and improve quality. Why we're here is because our customers are becoming increasingly dependent on our models to help them predict the financial futures of their business and a number of these production inventory related items. And if that information isn't properly secured, then that compromises at some level the accuracy of the models that we're able to create. So we're here to talk about the importance of how data is being used and securing that data as you guys continue your digital journey.
Awesome. Kyle, could you introduce yourself to the team?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kyle Turk. I'm a technical solutions architect, Aspire Technology Partners. specializing in emerging technologies. Got 20 years of RF experience in delivering data over RF to customers, and I'm here to connect everyone to the future in the IoT space.
Well, this is all, it takes a village, and you've got the right team here to go ahead and talk about security. So do you want to get started?
Yeah, let's get started. I'll just make one comment. We're coming to you live today from Aspire's lab. Amongst banners behind us, we have a wide variety of different IoT solutions and networks in real-world contexts. So if you want to come see what we're talking about today, please make a journey to Oppedisano. We'd be happy to have you.
Hotel nearby, great diner. I encourage you to come.
And only a few miles from the Jersey Shore, Asbury Park.
Let's take your summer trip. All right, so am I going to go to the questions?
Yeah, let's have it.
So one of the things you were talking about from an industry trends perspective, now that we've talked about security, everybody knows it's top of mind. Kyle, can you talk about some of the changes you've seen in the Fort Auto industry where people are really digitizing and some of the challenges out there?
Yeah, sure. I think over the history of humanity, we've always been trying to make our workloads more efficient, more effortless, and specifically, we try to do that through advancing technology. And sometimes this technology advancements happen at a rapid pace and an exponential growth rate, right? And those tend to indicate a series of industrial revolutions. And Industry 4.0 is no different than those previous iterations. We're seeing advancements in automation, advancements in artificial intelligence. We're seeing ubiquitous network access for all things, either whether they're on the internet or whether they're something deployed by your own internal enterprise team. But really, where is that setting us as far as security goes? It's providing additional threat vectors, and are we opening ourselves up to additional threats from bad actors? And then you got to ask yourself, are we safe from these threats? And if we aren't, what do we do to address these issues in the ever expanding and evolving space of IoT?
Well, I think one question I had then is when you were talking about security, we're here on the cement floor. There's a lot of equipment in here that isn't traditionally part of the enterprise network. So Dan, now that we've talked about all the dangers out there, what is your approach to a customer? Step one when they're looking to secure these non-carpeted space.
So if you're looking at the plant floor or any industrial environment for that matter, what we find typically is that most of the time the IT folks really don't have a good representation of the assets that are out there. So it really kind of starts with that cultural acknowledgement that IT doesn't know as much about the OT space, and the OT people don't know as much about the IT space. So it's really trying to get together and try to understand what assets are out there, what's talking to what, to at least get that baseline to start. That's really where we always tell people is that you got to have representation from both sides to really get a real cybersecurity effort off the ground.
Well, that's great. I have a question here from the audience. So Pascal, the question to you is that there are security operation centers that are typically manned for the enterprise. Are you seeing an emergence of security operation centers specifically dedicated for industrial areas?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So what we are seeing is that globally, our customers today are digitalizing IT and OT and converging them into global operation to get a better productivity. And when saying that, one point which is extremely important, of course, is cybersecurity. And the vast majority of the customers that we are seeing are today willing to integrate IT and OT supervision in a single SOC. Nevertheless, for very, very specific or sensitive environment like the nuclear environment, military environments, or very sensitive chemical environments, we are seeing customers that want to have dedicated SOCs in order to manage their OT specifically with specific processes. But the vast majority today wants to converge IT and OT in a single SOC.
That's great. And then another question that was asked, and this one goes to Rick, is that when I order something on Amazon, it tells me when it's going to be delivered. I don't care about the data as to when it moved from the shelf into the cart. There's a lot of data out there. But how do you approach all this data around security and making it presentable and actionable to customers in the IoT space?
There we go. Sorry about that. I was on mute. So for us, what we do is we first start off with understanding the customer security model, right? So in some cases, you want to deploy models that are localized, and in other cases, you can deploy them from a cloud deployment. So that's kind of where it starts, is what is the use case and what level of security is attached to that data in a normal scenario, right? And then how much more important does that data now become if it's predictive, and does that level of security need to increase? So what we've seen in some cases that, you have some stuff on the factory floor that was just considered machine data. And so, there's a lower level of security because the customer, the manufacturer just feels that this is anonymous information that even if someone else got their hands on, they couldn't really do a whole lot with. So that's changed, right? When you start taking that information and then you integrate that with an ERP system, and then you start to integrate that with quality data, and you've got this predictive plant floor platform now that tells you, what levels of production you should anticipate, how to address scrap issues, how to improve quality. Now that becomes a competitive advantage, right? So now all of a sudden, the value of that data skyrockets, right? It's no longer just machine data, but that machine data is part of an algorithm that is granting that customer competitive advantage. So that's kind of where the security stuff starts to really come into play a little bit more here at the IoT level. Because if that machine, if that IoT, whether it's a sensor scenario or a machine on the factory floor, if that machine's compromised in a way that prevents that data from entering the model in the way that it had been, that'll impact the accuracy of the model's prediction. And if that model's prediction is being used, so I was just on the phone this morning for an hour with a customer that is a major airplane manufacturer that is owned by a publicly traded company that is a massive defense contractor. And the information that we're generating through models on their floor helps us identify areas where they can improve operations financially, okay? And they are using that data, that financial, that operational model data. I'm trying to skirt around the NDA here, but they, they're using that information to report up to the company that owns them, which is publicly traded. And so through that relationship, they have to make sure that that data has the same level of security that a database that does financial reporting would, okay? And so when we started saying, okay, well, what's in that model, all of a sudden I started identifying a number of machines that didn't necessarily have the elevated levels of security that was required for that reporting process. So I hope that answers the question in a pretty fairly roundabout way, but it gives you guys a good level of detail of how, security is relevant when the data becomes more relevant. You know what I mean? As the data becomes more valuable, you've got to always look at security, because if that data continues to increase in value, then it's something you want to make sure is reliable.
Right, Rick, and we're seeing the value of data, like you say, increase the efficiency of operations, but it's also impacting quality, potentially the chain of custody of the item or the data, and how that might impact
so Carter,
liability issues as well.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the big thing that we see is that the real question here is, how serious are you about protecting your competitive advantage, right? Are you serious like Kentucky Fried Chicken is serious about the Colonel's recipe? Are you serious like Coca-Cola is serious about the recipe? So once you start developing these competitive advantages through these predictive models that generate, serious, return and, like scrap reductions, things like this, if once you start seeing that, it now becomes, how serious are you about protecting your competitive advantage? It's that simple.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, I have one other question, if that's okay. Dan, while we have you here, I mean, I'm relatively new to this industry, believe it or not, even though I have the hat. And by the way, Rick, I like fried chicken. Now you got me hungry. My question is, we've always known in the enterprise world, cloud-based applications, Salesforce, Office 365. It seems to me that more and more of the OT technology is starting to integrate into cloud solutions. Are you seeing more of that, or is that a new phenomenon? And And what's the challenge in securing those environments?
And that actually, it's a hot topic right now where you have all of the automation vendors and other IT vendors. Everything has a cloud model, but when you talk to plant floor people, it's still this mindset of it needs to stay on-prem. And I think they've been educated enough to say that, well, we don't want to just poke holes in the firewall. So they kind of just throw up their arms and say, well, we're not sending anything to the cloud. I had this literally just happen yesterday where a customer was like, no, we can't do anything cloud. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to educate that this is kind of the beauty of the whole Cisco IoT message in the connected factory, Cisco validated design. There are secure ways to send data to the cloud. You need to start very, very fundamental with the industrial demilitarized zone. We need to kind of get past the notion of just poking holes in a firewall. We need to talk about what are those resources in the IDMZ to be able to broker that data up to the cloud. So these are conversations that OT people 5 years ago did not have to think about. But since everything is moving to more cloud-based models, it is a massive education effort on we can do this, we can do it securely, and everybody's going to benefit from it. Because if we don't do this, we're going to be stuck in the past. So yeah, I mean, it is a hot topic. It's something that we're trying to change. And I do think that Cisco's doing a great job by providing the guidance on how to do it.
That's great.
Awesome. Did you, now, Carter, did you have some questions around the vulnerabilities?
Well, specifically, yeah, maybe I'll ask Pascal this one. Just specifically, coming from the industry, what are the types of vulnerabilities that you're seeing in industrial networks?
Hey, can I ask you one thing? Pascal and Rick, when you're speaking, could you speak a little bit louder? Because I think you might be coming in a little bit low. So anyway.
Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, we're in the IT world, we're very familiar with the traditional types of threats of malware and bots and phishing and all that sort of thing. But when you go to the factory, what sort of vulnerabilities and threats are you seeing out there?
So what we are seeing, first of all, is, as you said, and as everybody said, is a very low level of awareness of people being in the OT world regarding cybersecurity. So for me, the very first level of threat is ignorance. They do ignore where the risks are. So we need absolutely to commonly enhance the level of knowledge of risk, potential risk in the OT environment. The second point, which is important in my opinion too, is that in the OT world, this is a world of subcontracting. You have a lot of suppliers that are working instead of the customer, doing the job instead of the customer itself. And clearly these guys can import a lot of danger when they are doing a lot of things on customer side. On the other hand, what we've seen many, many times is that as the OT environment has not been built to be secure, IT problems are occurring, are coming into like a card system into the OT environment. And just a very humoristic example that we've seen in a very big automotive company here in Europe, the elevator have been affected and the door system have been affected by the WannaCry that has attacked the IT system. So clearly, today, the second level of risk, my opinion too, is the fact that IT may put a lot of pressure on the OT environment, which is absolutely not protected. This is for very basic attack. But when, as it was the case recently in the Middle East or in the US, not exactly in the US, but mainly in the Middle East with Aramco, when you have state attacks, very elaborated state attacks, this situation is major risk for company with a very big impact on the environment, on the ecology, and so on and so on. So in these cases, when you have a very complex, very sophisticated way of attacking, this environment, which has not been structurally protected, is under a very heavy level of risk. And the consequences are very, very big. We've seen that with the water company, we've seen that in petroleum, in pharmaceutical, in a lot of spaces. And clearly, it depends of the willingness of the attackers to attack on a political way, or just to get money, or just to create a problem.
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. That's great. And Kyle, you've been in the industry, like you said, 20 years. In the last couple of years, what are you seeing that is different today than it was a few years ago?
Yeah, I think a lot of the IoT industry in the past couple of decades has moved from more dumb devices to more smarter devices by integrating analytics into the devices themselves, giving them more compute and more different types of devices. But I've also seen a divestiture of the current RF plans and the analog old school RF that the FCC has got set aside is being moved over to more data-driven data paths and RF technologies and an advancement in that RF technology. But
it seems like everything's going digital now.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas the interface might have been more hands-on, or someone would actually go up to the machine or whatever and knew the interface to the machine really well. All that's being replaced by digital, by a computer, by a network, which opens up all sorts of vulnerabilities, I would think.
And a lot of these IoT products are now something that people are looking to utilize, and bad actors and hackers are looking at these things as free compute in a distributed fashion. So, if they attach themselves onto these devices and start utilizing them for their means, such as mining cryptocurrency or performing ransomware or DDoS attacks with hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of devices, it's kind of scary.
Since you brought up ransomware, I mean, a lot in the news lately. So I'll ask the whole panel, just what have these, the high visibility in the media of these recent attacks and the financial impact, as well as just the quality of life impact on the United States, what has that done to your customers? I mean, is there a whole new level of awareness and people being on guard, or have they been doing this all along?
So let me give you the European view, as I'm based in Europe. The very first point is that European and each state in Europe have decided to create some rules and policies in order to protect the very sensitive environment. So we do have these laws that are guiding the global approach regarding risk. The second point is that during the last 5-6 years, we had some attacks, but at the end of the day, the mindset of our customer is exactly the same as mine with my car insurance. It's always a pain to pay for something that may happen. And till you are not in a big problem or in a big trouble, insurance is always a pain to pay. So in fact, the level of acceptance is rising, is going up. Nevertheless, it remains something to be paid for. And it was very interesting about what was said a few minutes ago. Clearly, we need to transform and to show the value that cybersecurity can provide to the processes, because we will clean the environment, we will enhance the level of quality of production, and this is probably a way to promote and to sell cybersecurity. Last point, I've met many times with people that have faced big issues and that were obliged to speak with journalists to explain to the market the impact on their stock market. And clearly, for them, it was a drama. It was something that they were not trained to. And this drives them to change their mind and to put in place a lot of new procedures in order to integrate the OT cybersecurity as a global process. But this will take time. We are at the very beginning of a new process, of a new way of thinking. And clearly, I do the comparison, very frequently the comparison with what happened on telephony over IP 20 years ago. It will take as long as the telephony to converge on IP. At the end of the day, telephony over IP is still now something that is running, but it has taken 2 decades to move from the TDM to the telephony over IP. And I think it will be probably the same for OT cybersecurity, sorry.
And I just got a question from the audience, and it goes from the European Union over to Rick. And the question is, what percentage of your discussions now include, we need to be able to take a look at this security data in a consolidated, actionable way? Are you seeing a larger percentage of your meetings now including a security component?
Yeah, so what's interesting is that, we call it alarm fatigue. It's just, we do just see, you have multiple systems that have to do with system security. They're all generating their own particular types of alerts or alarms. They may or may not be correlated with, other systems that give the security personnel the holistic view that they need. So we have done some of those scenarios where we look at modeling everything ranging from data access ratios, the intervals in which the data is transferred from the device to the database, access scenarios. Is there a query that's accessing a particular machine or database, or even a PLC that's not the norm, right? So yeah, there's a number of those scenarios that we're starting to see a little more of. Again, it all just comes back to I guess, and another important point here is that the customers that are considering those scenarios that we work with tend to be a little bit more mature, okay? Meaning that they are already starting to get some level of value out of the data, meaning that they've assigned some, they've already invested real money in IoT and data collection. At that point, that's kind of, it's almost like insurance in a way, where they say, okay, how can we start to take the security data, put this together to leverage the same things that we're leveraging on the plant floor, things like anomaly detection, right? If we take a look at network traffic, packets, identity access management, IoT security. If we put all those pieces together, can we baseline typical system behavior and then understand if there's an anomaly in one place or another that in the past was something that generated a valid alert? So hopefully that answers the question.
Oh, that's great. Did you have a question to anything come across your screen yet?
No, I mean, great answer. That leads me to a sort of a follow-on question. I'll ask to Dan about, do we see your customers doing an overall risk analysis? So looking at the data that they're collecting, looking at how critical it is that certain parts of the manufacturing process keep running, et cetera. And are they doing an overall risk analysis and including cybersecurity in that?
Yeah, so what we see is that typically the projects that we would execute, you're always doing some sort of a failure mode analysis, risk matrix for the actual control system, the cause and effect of the interlocks, of what could happen from a safety perspective. But kind of even dovetailing into the other question about, what has this done to our customers in terms of their awareness of these issues or wanting to drive cybersecurity strategies. One thing that we've seen has been, if you look 5-10 years ago, security in the OT space, it was very much a bottom-up approach where we, the systems integrators, and I don't want to disparage our community, but the OT systems integrators, we were responsible for everything. So we had to put together the network, we had to put together all the security, and unfortunately, we put together these sprawling flat networks. Everything's IP 192.168. Whatever. And we have caused a lot of the issues that we see today. But I guess where I'm going with this is that what I'm seeing more and more of, especially with the news and what you're seeing in the news, is this like almost board level awareness. And we have customers right now that we're working with literally on opportunities where this was a directive from the board, so top down. And it was that I need to understand better what's going to happen if this particular site goes down, or even a line, or what are the dependencies between lines. So often when we're going into baseline, as Rick was talking about, we're not just baselining just on the data. We are baselining about interdependencies of work cells and how are things segmented. So we have to think about some of those fundamental things that, unfortunately, we kind of painted ourselves into a corner on these large, flat, sprawling networks, and we just got to get down to basics. We got to get down to segmenting the networks, VLANs, basic security hygiene. So yeah, I do think a risk analysis is all part of it, and if it's driven from the top, it's much more effective. But I think to Rick's point, it also has to do with the maturity of those customers.
Can I ask a question of you two guys? So one of the things I noticed is we were talking to some of the folks within Cisco who have a pulse on some of the federal money that's going to be released in June. And basically, I saw the spreadsheet where there's millions and millions of dollars headed to local towns and communities. And part of that is an opportunity to advance their security. correct? Because I think towns and municipalities have a lot of non-carpeted space.
Absolutely. Yeah, most cities, towns, counties, have some element of a utility, in their day-to-day operations, whether that's just moving water or stormwater or what have you. And they're all very vulnerable to attack.
In fact, just before we got on, Carter was on a call with a mayor of a town, and the police chief couldn't make the call because he was busy doing police stuff at the last minute, and a lot of police stuff. But I think there's an opportunity here, if you're out there in the customer webinar here, to work with Aspire, because they do know where those dollars are headed into what municipalities. And there was a person on that call that basically was the person who funds things. And as I understand it, it's going to be pretty, not easy, but more manageable to get a project going if it fits into that paradigm within the CARES Act. So I'd urge anybody, if they're looking for an advisor on that, work with Carter and Kyle in identifying what municipalities have money and how maybe you could tap into it.
Yeah, there's this whole notion of what critical infrastructure is, and particularly in the public sector, about what is required to keep the communities not just running, but safe. So water is a big one.
And I can imagine the machinery that's out there on the non-carpeted space in those environments is probably very similar to what it is in manufacturing. Older technology, flat networks, different protocols. So I think that's something to really tout.
And not to get into too much product specific discussion, but Cybervision, which is a Cisco product, and that really helps organizations address a lot of these issues. I mean, and there are other products out there as well, but we really like Cybervision. I mean, Kyle, how are you seeing companies using that?
Well, yeah, I think Cybervision, it allows you to get a baseline of your network from an IoT standpoint, analyze the data, take into account the assets that you have, and then from that data, allow the sensors and the AI and the machine learning to understand what goes on from a day-to-day basis in your environment. And then once we know what goes on, when we see something that's not normal or out of the ordinary, through heuristics, which is a difficult word to say, we can analyze and figure out where the problems are and try to mitigate them before they become this big snowball event that takes down half the East Coast's oil.
Well, let me ask this too, is that when you talk about, number one, Cybervision is a Cisco product, so I appreciate you guys mentioning it, because I did drive 4.5 hours down here for your webinar, and I do have the helmets we're giving away, so let's just put that up. But the question I had is Cybervision, to me, again, new to this, really can talk to the old and the new. And I don't mean, senior living centers and nurseries, but it talks to older technology and newer technology to secure it. So I think, Dan, you and I were talking about a project where the real eye-opening moment is when you do your audit and they see everything that's out there. So it's almost like an aha moment. So give us a little of the aha moment when you plug that in and people say, wow, what's out there?
So I think that I was talking about just basic network and security hygiene. If you go in and do a POC and we start to scan a network and you start to pull back information about old legacy PLCs and different HMI operator terminals, people start to be just shocked when they see all the vulnerabilities that have not been addressed, or the downrev firmwares that it's like, oh my gosh, there's 6 vulnerabilities against this. Why were we not ever updating this? And again, it's because OT has always had to keep everything running. And so when it came to, okay, we're going to do a plant shutdown for maintenance, nobody's ever thinking about preventative maintenance on the control system and cybersecurity and the network. They're thinking about preventative maintenance on valves and pumps and conveyors and all that type of stuff. What we're trying to do is we're trying to say, hey, now that we have this data, let's also try to get to a point where the engineering teams, the maintenance teams are working with IT to start to put together a program to start to address some of these vulnerabilities that something like a Cybervision is now bringing to the forefront. So I do think that, we talk about it, it's a product, but it's a long overdue product for OT to be able to say, we really should be addressing these things. And I do think it's IT that says, we've been addressing these sorts of things forever. That's what we do. But that's also part of the problem, is that OT is so used to saying, yeah, the last time that you guys updated firmware on that switch that you managed, that one switch you managed, you took us down for 6 hours. And so you have to kind of get past that. But one of the things that I do think is kind of cool, without going into the weeds, is that Cybervision really is a product that it's kind of built for that OT persona, but the data that comes out of it is more for the IT folks who can help drive security policy. And I do think that that's where we as an OT community really need to help.
Now, are there, we just talked about OT versus IT. Are OT folks learning the skills to do this, or are IT and OT working together, or is it a little bit of both?
I think that OT is still hesitant to get in and learn command line and things of that nature. But when you can give them a graphical user interface, like you have in, like, say, Cybervision or some of the other switch management tools that Cisco has, they will start to embrace it a little bit more. And I think that that's something that, just going back to the basics about basic network segmentation, et cetera, we still have like maintenance guys that say, I hate managed switches because in the middle of the night, if I have to configure it, I'm just going to be down for that much longer. And I don't know how to configure it. I'm going to have to call somebody. I can pull an unmanaged switch off the shelf and just plug it in. It just works. Yeah, it kind of works in those really, really poorly designed environments where everything's flat. There's no segmentation whatsoever. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to push them more towards an overall management strategy around how can I use something like Cisco's Industrial Network Director to manage my entire IE industrial IoT network, where I can actually push a configuration to a switch in much the same way that I would push a configuration to a PLC and download a program. Like we do online edits all the time through Rockwell Studio 5000 on a PLC. Why is it that hard to start to embrace that, hey, I have another piece of software that could help me with zero-touch deployment of a managed switch? So yeah, I think that the IT/OT thing is still very complex, but I do think that the more mature organizations are getting it, that the IT people are there to help and the OT people are there to benefit. But on the flip side, the IT people are also benefiting from learning just the wealth of knowledge of what's out there on the plant floor. So we're seeing it more and more today, and it's a really, really good thing. It certainly opened our eyes.
Hey, I have a question here in the and this question is for Rick and also maybe Pascal. The pipeline that was not stopped but attacked a couple of weeks ago. A couple of days afterwards, maybe a few days, the U.S. government came out and said, "Look, for those that do business directly or indirectly with the U.S. government, you've got to step up your cybersecurity game. We cannot have this happening to our population." Then I also heard that some insurance companies are refusing to insure companies that don't meet certain standards now going forward. So my question is, with those things in the mix, I think it becomes even more important that, Rick, your company can show cleanliness, hygiene from a data analytics perspective for these customers, whether it's a government entity that's going to be coming in and asking questions or an insurance. So are you seeing any of that in the marketplace, Rick? Any of those insurance and government coming out and you helping people show they're clean or hygienic?
Yeah. So you guys remember like years ago when e-discovery was the big thing for email. You had to come up with this kind of chain of custody for emails that entered any sort of due diligence or legal process, and all of a sudden there was this big range of software that was able to do that, right? Like your Mimecast and people like that, right? So we're seeing some of the same things starting to happen with data in terms of how it's being secured, what is the chain of custody, who's got access. The evolution that we're in from a technology standpoint kind of globally is starting to drive a little more of this. So let me answer your question specifically about insurance. So we are working with a top 5 global insurance company right now on solving one big challenge, which is, hey, how do we know which of these autonomous driving systems presents the most risk in what scenario, right? How do you know the difference in how Tesla's automated autonomous driving system handles a certain traffic or weather situation versus how Volkswagen's might? And how do we assign, an actuarial risk equation to that? And so what's happening is they're going through this whole kind of chain of custody for that use case, where they're saying, okay, we need to control the quality level of the data that's coming from the car, the vehicle. How do we do that? We need to understand and control the intervals in which that data is collected. What happens if that person goes off the grid, right? What if they, they drive up to the top of a mountain? How do we refresh that data? How do we bring that back, right? So there's a number of these scenarios where again, similar to e-discovery years ago, where you've got this chain of custody around how the data is being handled, who's had access to it, what level of frequency in which it's being collected, and ultimately to kind of circling all that back to cleanliness, right? There's data cleanliness isn't necessarily just about missing values, right? It's not necessarily just about, stuff that goes on, beyond a standard deviations, outliers, statistic outliers. A lot of it has to do with who's had access to the system and when, operator training, right? If your operator is putting in quality data and they haven't been trained well, and you've got, 6 months of quality data on a particular process from someone that hasn't necessarily nailed that training, you know what I mean? So there's a number of things that you can pick up in the data that'll come back and help you establish that chain of custody.
Yes, speaking of chain of custody, one question that is in the back of my mind is what you're seeing, if you're seeing the introduction of cyber currency or blockchain into some of the processes out there, and what does that mean? And that's at a whole new level.
Yeah, so we only have 1 or 2 customers that are really starting to look into that. Again, one of them is an agricultural customer that is seeking to have kind of that fair trade type of a label for all their products, where they can say, hey, this bag of coffee that you just bought, we can trace back everybody who's ever had access to those, those grounds that are in that bag, and we can validate that, this is truly fair trade, right? But there's really, from a manufacturing standpoint, we haven't really seen it yet. I think to Dan Malyszko's point earlier, there's still this maturity that needs to happen between IT and OT, but there's a third party in here that hasn't really been talked about, and that's finance. Okay, so when we work with a customer, we do not consider the customer serious. We don't really consider them even really a prospect until they can bring in the subject matter expert, which is your OT person, your IT person, and then somebody from finance that can quantify the impact of this effort, right? And so when you start to think about blockchain and things like that, a lot of the applications in manufacturing that you think of tend to become financial over time. So as that relationship between OT and IT and potentially finance continues to start to evolve into something that's a little bit more cohesive, I think after that is when you'll start to see more of the blockchain stuff becoming relevant. I mean, at least that's what we're seeing. I mean, Pascal, Dan, do you guys see it the same way?
Yeah, on my side, I'm totally in line with you. What we are seeing now is that we are starting from very, very far. So the level of maturity of the networks in the OT environment is extremely poor. And clearly the PLC or RTUs that are communicated with encrypted protocols are extremely limited. And I think I'm totally in line with you. I think we're going to go with to blockchain solution, but it will probably take time. I just want to come back on what you said, and I think it was extremely interesting regarding the insurance aspects. One point, my opinion too, which is important to raise in the mindset of our customers, is clearly to help them answer the question, the what if question. And in terms of impact, in terms of media, in terms of stock market, in terms of economical consequences. And this is the very first step of the process. And this will also probably be part of the insurance or reinsurance process for the customers. Because at the end of the day, the problem is how much does it cost to solve a big issue like the one that you were speaking of concerning the pipeline in the US.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So Chris just sent me a question from the audience asking, this is like the best of breed webinar. You have Malyszko, you've got Delta Bravo, you've got Cisco, you've got Aspire in particular. So if I'm a customer, how do I start? Do I call each one of these people, or who can help me to glue this all together? Who's the lead integrator, contractor here? Who do they call you?
Well, we'd be honored if you.
I think it was a softball. Who do we start with?
So again, Aspire is a systems integrator, and we do happen to specialize in IoT, among other things. So we're pretty comfortable when it comes to RF and different types of network technologies out there. So yeah, we would love to be involved, starting with an assessment. If we need to bring in an industry expert in for a particular vertical, we have them, in our ecosystem. And love to bring someone like a Kyle in and have him see what's going on,
And I don't take that
with the
lightly,
network.
because if you look around, these guys have a lot of experience, carpet and non-carpet. You can see it here, of all the different technology. And it's not just about Cisco with these projects. There's all kinds of other pieces and parts to it. So although we like to always think it's about Cisco, it's not. It's about a trusted advisor that can bring in other third-party components. And then, selfishly, you do have the Cisco throat to choke, because as we all work together here, that your Cisco team will make sure that we have the right resources to help in any an event with the deployment of a solution.
Yeah, and if it's connected to a network, whatever type of network, whatever type of protocol, the odds are that they'll be pretty comfortable with it.
And that was a free commercial. You didn't even buy me dinner last night. I will ask, does anybody what's the best way to get IT and OT together? Is it at a dinner party? Is it across the conference table? Any good stories to tell before we wrap up with the last couple of questions? Any good IT, OT stories? Breaking bread, having fun? It's another webinar. It really is another webinar. Chris, are there any other questions out there?
Sorry, Paul, I could take that. I mean, I would say that in the conference room across the board, in the boardroom would be great. But I think in reality, it comes down to when OT is doing a project and there's new equipment that's being spun up, whether that's IoT equipment or traditional ICS, industrial control system equipment. I do think it's incumbent on those people to be thinking about IT and the IT impact. On the flip side, when IT, when they have a project, whether that be we're going to resegment or we're going to, put in a couple more IDFs that are more enterprise, but they're in the plant, pull in maintenance people, pull in engineers, pull in the plant manager, the operations people, and say, hey, we're going to put this in. Did you guys have any need for any additional data? And that will just naturally start this conversation.
That's great.
I agree, man. I think what I see is the organizations that pull this off successfully usually have like an executive directive that says, hey, we're going to make an investment in data collection. We're going to move toward this Industry 4.0 concept. We're going to seek to reduce operational expense through this particular technique, right? And so that gives most of the, that in most cases gives IT and OT and finance a common language to start kind of moving towards, right? So usually when we see a customer that's got that level of executive sponsor, things tend to happen a little bit. The other side of it too is just general maturity. It's like, come on, the market is super challenging right now, right? You've got these labor challenges, that's not going away. You've got this whole concept of what we just experienced in the supply chain with COVID. If American manufacturing, if North American manufacturing is going to be able to keep up, and if it's going to be able to excel through challenges like that in the next 4, 5, 6, 10 years, this stuff has to happen now. It's not just about letting go of your server. It's not just about hoarding operational data or saying it's got to be done my way or the highway. It's about survival at this point. In the organizations that are serious about survival and thriving, these are the guys that are investing time, money, that have an executive directive, that have established this common lexicon that their organizational silos can use to communicate.
That's awesome.
One point, just one point to add, and I think what we've seen is that probably one of the very efficient way to start the project is to share experiences. And what I've seen many, many times is that when we have customers from the same type of environment speaking to each other, clearly it accelerates dramatically the process, and sharing experience is very, very efficient for our customers.
That's great. Stories and conversation and collaboration.
Kyle, any last thoughts to bring us home? I mean, you work in both the IT world and OT world, right, on a pretty much daily basis. So when you bring your skills, from the data center or the firewall into the OT world, I mean, what are you seeing? Are people open to it, or?
Yeah, I mean, historically speaking, I feel like there has been some resistance between those two groups of individuals, but I think that we have to come together and we have to, inspire each other to keep in mind that most of these things affect the whole organization, and that it's detrimental to the cost centers of the business that you do. And it really means a lot to start getting involved and dig in deep on both sides. IT takes some interest in the OT project, and OT takes a significant understanding of security threats because they're out there. You haven't been getting updates for 10 or 15 years, but you should start thinking about that now. We've had Microsoft updates on IT
Daily basis.
since the beginning, right, in the IT world.
Yeah.
And, IT people should be a little bit patient to understand that that hasn't been the way it has been traditionally in OT.
Yeah, we're seeing so many, not just systems, but networks, all sort of move towards IP, which is great for people in information technology, but it also means that OT folks have to learn networking, and it levels the playing field in terms of vulnerabilities.
Did you have any final parting thoughts before we go to the quiz questions?
Let's just go to the quiz questions, and then we'll wrap it up. I'll put the slide up at the end.
Why don't you try to get Sam in here too? Hey, Sam, why don't you come in here so people can see it's like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtains over there. Is he out there? All right, so here are the two quiz questions. Chris, I'm going to ask you, come on over here. You were part of this production. Sam,
meet the panel.
behind the curtains. How old are you?
21.
Dear Lord, okay. Here are the two quiz questions I have. Number one, the first person to answer to Chris, and then Chris, you're going to get their addresses, please, is what is the name of the Cisco cybersecurity solution discussed today? What is the name of the Cisco cybersecurity solution discussed today? That's the first question, and you're going to get a box full of all this good. And last time, all the winners were from Amsterdam, so I'm sure those packages are still making their way over there. So the second question is, who do you start with on a cybersecurity journey in the OT world? What company do you reach out for? I'll give you a hint. It's the one that sponsored this event.
And if you know it, post it to Chris, and then we'll send out the IoT gift package. I think that was it. Okay, well, thanks everybody.
Big thanks to the not the contestants, to the speakers. Thanks a lot, guys. That was great. And to the participants. It was fun, right, Sam?
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.